Imagine walking across a desert with absolutely no water, no bottle in your hand, no river nearby, and no idea where the next drink will come from. For ancient humans, this wasn't an adventure. It could be a matter of life and death. So how did they find water when the landscape looked completely dry? They couldn't simply look for a blue river. They had to learn how to read the land. Plants could reveal hidden moisture. Animals could reveal where water might be. And the landscape itself left clues. Sometimes, water was hiding just beneath his feet. The trick was knowing where to look. And ancient humans had one huge advantage. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Parents taught children where water could be found. And those lessons could mean survival. Because in a desert, knowing where to go was everything. But their first clue wasn't always water. It was the shape of the land. Low areas were important. When rain came, water naturally moved downhill. Even a desert can temporarily collect water, and sometimes the river wasn't visible anymore. But an old riverbed could still reveal where water once flowed. Following these channels could lead toward better places to search. Sometimes the ground itself looked different. Softer or damp-looking sediment could be a clue, because water can remain underground long after the surface dries. Beneath the desert, hidden water can survive. The challenge was finding it. Then there were plants. A patch of healthy vegetation could be extremely interesting. Why would plants stay green in a place where everything else was dry? Sometimes their roots were reaching water below the surface. Ancient humans could learn to recognize useful vegetation. Not every plant meant water was immediately available, but patterns in vegetation could reveal where moisture was more likely, especially when many plants grew together. Suddenly, the empty desert wasn't so empty, but finding the clue was only the beginning. The water might still be hidden, and reaching underground water wasn't always easy. Another clue came from animals. Birds need water too. Their movements could sometimes reveal where water or vegetation existed, but birds weren't the only animals worth watching. Other animals also had to solve the same problem. Herds often traveled toward reliable resources. Their repeated paths could become useful clues. Tracks could tell a story. If animals repeatedly traveled in one direction, there might be something important at the end. Sometimes that something was water, and discovering it could save an entire group. Of course, the most famous desert water source is an oasis. An oasis could provide water, shade, plants, and sometimes food. Finding one could completely change a journey. But oases weren't scattered randomly. Many formed where groundwater reached or came close to the surface. Vegetation could therefore become a visible signal. From far away, even a few trees could mean hope. But there was another danger. The desert can create convincing mirages. What looks like water may be nothing more than reflected light. Following every shiny patch of the horizon could waste precious energy. Experience taught people not to trust appearances alone. Then there was rain. Even deserts can receive sudden rainfall, and when it happens, water can move incredibly quickly. Dry channels can suddenly become flowing streams. People could collect water when conditions allowed. Temporary pools could become valuable resources. Storing water was just as important as finding it, because the next source might be many hours away. Every drop mattered. A successful journey depended on planning. Experienced travelers learned routes between reliable water sources. These routes could become essential pathways through the desert. Sometimes, however, the water was underground. People could dig in places where underground water was likely, especially near old river channels or low areas. Damp sand could be an encouraging sign. It meant water had moved through the ground. But reaching enough water to drink wasn't guaranteed. Sometimes there was barely enough. Every little source could still make a difference. A few mouthfuls could buy time, and time was exactly what travelers needed. But ancient humans weren't just reacting to water. They could learn patterns. Certain places became wetter during particular times of year. Knowing when to travel could be just as important as knowing where to travel. Clouds could signal approaching rainfall. Preparation gave them an advantage. They could take advantage of short periods of abundance, then carry that water into the dry period. This turned knowledge of seasons into survival. But there was another skill that may have been even more important: memory. Imagine discovering a reliable water source. You wouldn't want that knowledge to disappear. So knowledge could be passed from elders to younger generations. A strange rock, a particular tree, an old river channel. All of these could become landmarks in a mental map. No GPS, no satellite map, just memory, observation, and experience. And those skills could keep an entire group alive. But what happened when their plan failed? What if the water source had dried up? What if animals had already used it? Or what if they simply took the wrong route? Then the desert became much more dangerous. Heat drained their bodies. Every step consumed precious water. Shade became valuable. Moving during cooler periods could reduce the heat burden, and sometimes the safest journey happened after sunset. The stars could also help them navigate. Losing the route could be just as dangerous as losing water. Then they spot something. Fresh tracks. They look newer than the others. The group follows them. The trail leads toward vegetation. Then they notice birds, and the birds are flying downward. Something is definitely there. And finally, they find it. Water, not a giant river, not a massive lake, just enough to keep the journey going. So how did ancient humans actually find water in a desert? They learned to combine clues: plants, animals, landforms, weather, and most importantly, knowledge. Knowledge passed from one generation to another. What looks like an empty desert to us could have been a map full of clues to them. A green plant wasn't just a plant. Birds weren't just birds. Animal tracks weren't just footprints. And a dry riverbed wasn't necessarily dead. Beneath the surface, water could still be waiting. The desert was hiding it. And humans survived by learning where to look. They didn't defeat the desert. They learned to understand it. And sometimes that knowledge was the difference between finding water and never finding it at all.